welcome back. And here we are for the 11th in our little journey through the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. So in today's video, we are going to be covering the final 6 cards of the deck, cards 55 through to 60. And in our final video of this series, Ken and I are going to be looking at ways with which you can work with the deck and read with the deck and everything like that. So welcome back anyway. We hope you've enjoyed it thus far, and we hope that you enjoy this journey through the final 6 cards. So, and welcome back, Ken.
Thanks for having me back.
Couldn't do it without you, could I? This really has been a joint effort, hasn't it? But yeah, joint effort, but actually just one of the best projects I've ever worked on. I've got to say that. Actually, one thing we will cover in this, as well as the last 6 cards, once we've completed the last 6 cards, we'll say a little bit about the back design, won't we? Because in a way, that's kind of been, it almost ended up the 61st card, didn't it? I think
in a way, yeah.
So we'll throw that in as well for good measure. So I know this is one of your very, very firm favourites, isn't it? Number 55.
Yeah.
Medea. And the keyword on this is magic with a CK, which we'll talk about. But yeah, tell me about this. We both first came across this particular mythological figure in a certain Ray Harryhausen film, didn't we?
Yeah, the rather stunning Nancy Kovac playing Medea, doing that rather amazing scene of dancing in the Hecate's temple. That's like just the main sort of steering force behind this particular iteration of the card. Obviously, through my years of like reading and researching and such, I've been exposed to different source material that references Medea's links with Hecate and her views as a priestess and her ability to, call on the goddess and use herbs and poisons to create various forms of magic. And yet, in a lot of modern eyes, she's kind of only ever really remembered for being that sort of tortured female figure that kind of kills her children out of spite, and that seems to be the most enduring thing that's kind of survived for her. And it kind of just completely ignores this whole other chapter of her life where she was this devout priestess of the goddess.
So tell me about this image. I mean, you had a very specific idea in terms of creating this image, and we were kind of lucky, weren't we, in terms of again, I kind of photo collage this, part from Creative Commons, part from textures that I had in stock, part with silhouettes. But I think actually of all the cards we did, if there was any one card that came together 100% organically and just felt convincing, it's this one, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just. I think what sort of steered it was that central stock image that we did find, because whereas we've used silhouettes in other in other cards, and obviously with the gods and the goddesses, we've used statuettes on a lot of occasions. Obviously, with Medea being, I suppose in some respects she's seen as a mortal, but she's sometimes seen it sort of as a demigod, because some of her lineage, sometimes she's referred to as like a granddaughter of Helios. And so she, the thing with these early humans in myths, they tend to have a bit of a genealogical connection somehow to gods. And so once we found that image, I just kind of knew that was kind of what I was trying to get across, this sense of focused, pious devotion that is rewarded by being able to, implement these skills and this knowledge and this power to affect, change circumstances and things like that. And
I think on the original image, I think her face was a lot more visible, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And in a way, what we did was we took the image and then we darkened the face down so that you really can't see the face under the hood. There's tiny little hints of it. And then you'd said to me that you very much wanted to sort of emphasize that aspect of her, sort of almost like brewing an incantation, didn't you? And, brewing the potion. So we've got a lot of mist rising from the cauldron and what have you, which again, sort of partially obscures. What I love about this is that unbelievably, it kind of works visually, but there's that kind of lurid crash of red and green. Just somehow works for her. It's lurid on one level, on another level it's not. She stands out from it's. You're very much in the world of herbs and potions, and the green really evokes that for me. But then that bright red of her, of her temple garb, it just really, There's something organic chemically about her that I love.
And I think that was kind of where, especially with we set it in this sort of dark wooded glade type setting. That hints at the in the Argonautica when it references Medea's introduction. She is known to be at the temple of Hecate, in the gardens where the herbs and the and the plants are growing, and so it was almost a case of like trying to interpret that in a way to show this devoted priestess working, with everything that Hecate gives her, and yet in doing it in such a way that there's not really a huge sense of pomp and ceremony in this.
No,
it's quite simple, as an image, and quite sort of not static, but there's it's not exactly animated.
No.
But that comes from that's the focus and the devotion that she has, knowing that the goddess is listening to her prayers or listening to her petitions, and then affecting this potential for any amount of change, depending on what the circumstances or situations it are. And again, we've got like the mist, and then the vapor comes up out of the censer or the tripod cauldron, and then you can interpret that as maybe she's breathing in the fumes to open her her sense of perception and things like that.
I sort of one of the aspects I saw of this is like sort of divination through vapors. There's that kind of ancient tradition, isn't there, of inhaling certain vapors, certain drugs that lead to those states of vision, and that's kind of what I saw in this as well. She's kind of she could be divine in the coals, she could be divine in the vapors, but there is that very much that sense of there's something quite oracular about this that I love. I think really fits her personality, doesn't it? Let me just give you another throwaway, because you mentioned the incredibly and beautifully glamorous Nancy Kovac from Jason and the Argonauts. The kind of was it early 60s?
63.
63. All of our generations grew up with that, didn't we? It was
I'm not that old.
Well, it was a treat for you when it came on TV. I'm old enough. I went to the Odeon in Buttermarket Street in Warrington to see it on the big screen, and that was fabulous. But I recently managed to get hold of the early 2000s version of Jason and the Argonauts. Very different, but equally good, with the equally glamorous Jolene Blaylock.
Jolene Blaylock as Medea. Yes. Yeah.
And I loved her characterization of Medea, because she's kind of, you really would not trust that woman, and she kind of brings it over beautifully. But then again, that's kind of the nerd Trekkie bit of me taking over again, isn't it? So, but no, wonderful. Next time you come to stay, we will have a film night with the 2000s version. So Just one more thing on this. You were very specific about using the spelling of magic with a K.
Yes.
So just delineate for us again the difference between the two spellings and what they
So
signify.
there are various people that argue for and against the addition of the K onto the magic. From my experience of when I've learned about witchcraft and things like that, it was just something that I was kind of exposed to. And when the most general, easiest explanation is that the K helps denote from magic with just a C, as in stage magicians and sleight of hand and the sort of stagecraft of magic. Whereas when you spell it with a CK, it's meant to associate with, the more spiritual practice of witchcraft and things like that. And so, not everybody agrees with it, because some people say, oh, well, Crowley used it and we don't really want to do any, associate with Crowley now because, he was not a nice person, etc. But it just, for me, it's just always been a case of differentiating between the two. And when you see it written like that, then you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's funny because that's very much how I feel about it. I'm slightly uncomfortable with with some of the associations with it, but as a tool for clarifying, it really does. If I see it, I immediately think, yeah, we're kind of into the realms of ritual magic here. You're sort of into the realms of high magic in inverted commas. Or magic with a spiritual side, whereas as you say, there's an argument you can use either, but I think in this card it works quite well because it kind of just does denote that we're on that slightly different level, and that this is, there is, for me, with her, the acts of magic and the acts of worship are kind of indivisible. That's just the way I see Medea, as the priestess. So, yes. And Nancy Kovac was fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, my joking aside, let's move on to number 56. Kirke. And the key word on this is transformation. So tell us a little bit about what's going on here and about the myth. This was this was our awkward card, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was awkward. Obviously, you can't have Medea and not have Kirke or Circe, as most Westerners would pronounce their name. But when I kind of came up with the idea of how I wanted it to work, we just seemed to have no luck in finding any image that would work.
We couldn't find any suitable statues, could we, that would really do, there was kind of no classical reference points that we could work with that was suitable. And then we tried all sorts, haven't we? We tried working with, taking images of belly dancers and taking their silhouettes, and it kind of just looked naff. Even though the inference was within a story, we're fine. But in the end, we kind of went with this particular silhouette, but we created a version of this card, which is in our test deck, and it just did not look right to either of us, did it?
No, there was just always something about it.
Something that wasn't working. It looked flat in comparison to the others, and I couldn't get it. But what made it even more frustrating, neither you or I were happy with this, but when we kind of showed it to people who were going to be working with the deck, they were all oohing and ahhing over it and saying, and calling it a standout card. And which I found really frustrating. The irony was, when we did come to revise it, we made a couple of minor tweaks, and then all of a sudden it just fell into place, didn't it, for both of us?
Yeah.
And funny, much as we call it the problem card, the final version that you will actually see in the deck when it's published, both Ken and I, thankfully are really happy with. But it's amazing that just a couple of niggling little tweaks were the difference between it being, what actually now I feel is an outstanding card, and then previously was a card that we really was way short of outstanding in my eyes. And yet again, it shows it's in the eye of the perceiver, because everyone who leafed through the deck, and actually several key Hecateans that we handed the deck to look, and they're also, oh, I like this one. I'm thinking,
yeah.
But yeah, thankfully we got there in the end. And interestingly, why am I surprised now? We shouldn't be, because, you know, oh, she's a tricky character, you know?
Yeah, and again, it's another one of those ones that is often misunderstood, and just, I suppose, there is still the hanging on of that thing of, oh, she's just a neurotic woman kind of explanation as to her behaviour. Obviously, for people that are not strictly familiar with Kirke, she's she occurs in the Odyssey, where that follows Odysseus on his voyage home after the Trojan War. And at one juncture, him and his shipmates come to an island where it just seems to be populated by animals, and this sole female figure of Kirke, who's very accommodating, and she's very sort of seductive, and she basically invites them all in, and feeds them and things like that. But then there's this thing that happens where all of the men turn to swine and other animals, and and she tries to get Odysseus to stay with her for forever, and then obviously they get away, and and such. But it comes from this notion, this ability to transform, the fact that she has these skills. Again, she has links with Helios. She's sometimes seen as Medea's sister. They both have this connection with magic and witchcraft, and obviously by extension Hecate's involvement in that. And then she's using these abilities for different reasons, and for to different ends. And whilst it could be seen as as though she's just manipulating people and trying to get people to stay with her under sort of like duress of being turned into a pig or whatever, I see it more in, especially in this card, is it's about the ability to transform something that either isn't serving you or isn't isn't beneficial to you. I mean, in this, Kirke transforms the men because they're almost offensive. So she transforms them into something that matches more her perception of them,
of who they are.
Yeah. And then as a result is venerated as as a goddess, in this respect of she has this ability to charm and transform and produce effect.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I mean that really does raise quite an interesting aspect, in that she actually is stripping away outward appearances to reveal true nature. You could look at it as a metaphor for that, couldn't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And again, there's there is an element of excess as well that can be put in there. If you think about the myth where she plies them with food and drink, and there's a very sort of heady intoxication sort of that hangs in the air, prior to the transformation. And I think it's very telling that there are those times where we're blindsided by an infatuation, or something just absolutely captivates us, whether it's good for us or not.
Yes.
And and sometimes we find ourselves in a predicament that we might not necessarily be able to get out of. And yet then even though you could look and say that the Kirke energy from the card is what led to that, it's almost the lesson is that you can actually get back out of it, because you can transform again. You can. It's almost like you've got to learn the lesson, and then you can go.
You can go. It's funny. I mean, it's interesting you saying about the kind of old trope of the neurotic woman. Which again, I mean, I think sort of particularly when you look at when a lot of these myths were transcribed into English in popular versions, was sort of in the Victorian era and what have you, at the height of patriarchy. And I think a lot of these very powerful female figures were done a disservice in those retellings. I mean, it's kind of never struck me that she was neurotic. I mean, this is just like a don't mess with me sort of woman, know. And quite frankly, we all need to meet those, this was, we might have had a difficult journey with this image, but this is one of the wildest ones. This is the wild card for me in the deck,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, she's
And
definitely unpredictable.
yeah. It's interestingly enough, I mean, in terms of trying to draw a parallel in the tarot here, I mean, there's elements of the wildness of the fool, but then you've also got those sort of, you know, the earlier depictions of the magician as the trickster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's bits of him in her. You know, I think that with so many of these characters from Greek myth and from, you know, from the Greek epics, they're so multifaceted. But then that's why we still treasure that collection of myths and epics, isn't it? Because they tell us, even, you know, millennia down the line, they're still telling us so much about human nature, which essentially hasn't changed. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, not an easy card, but we got there in the end, thankfully.
Yeah.
Now, this is one that we're both quite fond of, isn't it? Number 57, the Lampades. And the key word on this is companionship. So who were they?
So the Lampades were torch-bearing nymphs.
Okay.
And as a result, were often, you know, seen as associated with Hecate. They were sometimes said to accompany her on her nighttime journeying and such.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, by extension, they sometimes were also seen in reference to Persephone when she's in the underworld. And there's this notion as well in a lot of the myths where nymphs are concerned that, you know, they're usually companions to another primary goddess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Artemis goes out hunting with other nymphs and things like that. And so these torch-bearing nymphs obviously have this connection with Hecate, and then to try and figure out how to best represent them in this card was initially something I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do, and I didn't. I think I did toy with actually taking them out, and then I think I put them back in again. I think all I did was I moved their order in the sequence of cards. I moved them further in. But yeah, I mean, there are various sort of different sources that sort of speak about how these nymphs are perceived. You know, some references, they're very much chthonic and quite dark. Sometimes, you know, it's said that the light of their torches can drive people to madness, and even like how the out in sort of like marshes or the desolate sort of moors, you know, the almost like a will-o'-the-wisp sort of leading you astray kind of thing. So there's there is a mischievousness there, but at the same time, I still kept coming back to this thing of companionship and the fact that they are companions to the goddess and such. So it kind of brings in a lot of that notion of companionship, that friendship, of relationships in those respects. And then obviously to us, they are basically getting us to analyze our, you know, circle of friends or our circle of influence. And then obviously when we sort of picked the imagery for putting them together, obviously I still wanted to sort of to lead with this sense of them being, you know, these subterranean chthonic beings, but obviously nymphs are, you know, are generally assumed to you know, to be nubile and lithe and slightly sexual, and I wanted it still to sort of touch on that without being too literal. And we found some really nice silhouettes of sort of interpretive dancers.
They were photos, weren't they? And then I just I drew silhouettes around them, and it's kind of really worked. I mean, I loved the fact that you wanted to show the Lampades in the underworld. And one of the things I love about this card is, you know, you just sense that they're in a very dark place, but it's the fact that the torches are just lighting everything up with this incredible warm, fiery glow. So it doesn't feel like an inhospitable space anymore. You know, it feels like a very atmospheric and warm space. But I loved the fact that we could, once we kind of had this idea, let's play with dancers, you know, and then once I thought, yeah, particularly when you turn them into silhouette, again, you know, if you looked at the actual source images that I based these figures on, they wouldn't necessarily be what you think they are, but once they're in silhouette, you can do all sorts. And I love the sort of balletic feel that we managed to, and also there is this playful kind of dancing will-o'-the-wisp quality about them, which
I think as well that there is subtle difference between the two.
Yeah.
The one with the single torch is sort of slightly less mobile, whereas the one with the two torches is obviously far more energetic. But then you can look at that and say, well, is she going to lead you away? Is she going to be playful and maybe sort of trick you into going down that tunnel? Is that tunnel going to go deeper to the underworld, or is it going to go out into the daylight?
We just don't know, do we?
Yeah, there's lots of nuance aspects to understand in this, especially in a reading. And again, I kind of took a little bit of inspiration from the tarot with the Three of Cups card, but the sort of the slightly negative aspect of the Three of Cups, that it's not always, you don't always have the people around you that have your best interests at heart.
It's funny, isn't it? This is, for me, initially I kind of only saw this in a quite two-dimensional way, but this really speaks to me now of, really choose your companions carefully, because in this instance, like you say, are they leading you deeper into the underworld or deeper into a labyrinth, further away from where you should be? We just don't know. I love this precisely because of that warm, inviting, playful veneer, but just with that little hint of danger. And very, very powerful in a reading, as you say. And I think that you just touched on something, because I think the Three of Cups, I think very often that aspect of the Three of Cups in the tarot is ignored. That dark aspect of it. I think people work with reversals. It's sometimes more obvious if you don't work with reversals in tarot. I think very often that dark aspect is sometimes neglected a little bit too much. I think the figures of the Lampades, I think they kind of really capture that double-edged sword quite well for me.
Yeah.
So, are we ready to go on to the final three cards?
Yeah.
These are awe-inspiring for me. I'll mention these as a triad first.
Yeah, I think it's probably best to look at them more as a triad than individually.
You go for it, because you can explain these way better you can introduce this way better than I can.
So the cards 58, 59 and 60 represent holy daemons. Daemons being the sort of Greek version of a spirit. It's where the root word for demons comes from, but it's not. They weren't necessarily, seen in a malicious, malevolent way. And I've had experience in my years with working with Hecate of some of these spirits appearing in snake form, in serpentine form.
Yeah.
And so, I've kind of come to know as well that I'm not alone in that. There are, other devotees and stuff that have had similar experiences of having snakes appear, in sort of visions and things like that. And so I really wanted to kind of not only represent that thread in the deck, but also to bring it to light for people that maybe hadn't encountered it. And so the sort of three colours that are often associated with Hecate are black, red, and white.
Yeah.
This comes, but there is a reference that I think it's Porphyry on images. He details basically that they carve sort of a waxen image of the triple Hecate in red wax, black wax, and white wax. Each one holding a different set of items.
Yeah.
And then bound in a snake skin.
Yeah.
And so my experience with these snakes has been that they appear in three different distinct forms.
Hmm.
So you get the black one, and you get a red one, and you get a white one.
Right.
And I've often found that the black one is associated with sort of like the underworld and lower aspects. The middle one is the red one, and it basically deals with sort of this realm, the sort of middle realms, but also I link it to sort of the ocean.
Yeah.
And then the white one is more, so it's higher. It's more to do with the upper realms. It's to do with direct sort of divine connection and such. And
I mean, in elemental terms, you're dealing with earth, water, and air.
they, and they are the three realms that she governs: the earth, sea, and sky. So there was definitely that I kind of put in, and yet I think the execution of these cards initially, the initial idea that we came up with just didn't
work, did it?
Didn't do it.
No, it really didn't work.
And I was really not. I suppose if I had to say I was really not happy with anything you've ever done, it was those.
I could tell. But this was really a case of us discovering that less is more, isn't it? Because actually what we ended up doing is simplifying these down very radically to the point where we've just got the background of each of these cards very much represents the elements. I mean, you can, if we look first at number 58, the Holy Demon of the Lower Realm, which you've basically given the keyword of protection to, haven't you? This is the background of this is basically parched earth, isn't it? It's like a sort of crackled earth. So why the keyword of protection?
So again, this is partly based on my own experience. But the black serpent spirit daemon, when it comes, tends to be about protection.
Right.
It seems to have a very guarding force. And obviously it's coming from sort of the underworld, from a chthonic place. So it has that very sort of earthy, stable quality to it. And obviously the symbol that we picked of the key kind of links to Hecate's role as a key bearer, but also of the underworld. So it's almost as though she's giving you a key, and this spirit helper that will help protect you when you move through the next doorway or whatever. So I kind of just felt that keeping them simple and leaving them very much down to the interpretation of the people that are using the cards, because I think that they will definitely speak differently to each person.
See, we ended up with these. I mean, we had all sorts of different elements in the image, which wasn't working, was it? And then eventually we literally just pared it right down to the background, the snake, and the talisman with each respective symbol on, didn't we? And actually that works, because I think, as I say, it's then down to each individual as to how they work with that. And it is eminently more focused, certainly, than what we were trying originally. So I mean, with 58, obviously you have the earth background, the serpent is black. It's basically a virtually, they're virtually, they're kindred images, aren't they? It's the same basic image, but we've altered the colors, we've altered the background, and then we've altered the symbol that's on the talisman at the front. So so what about number 59, Holy Daemon of the Middle Realm? And the word here is healing. So we're into the realm of water here, aren't we? Because we've kind of used an image of the surface of the ocean taken from above, haven't we? So you can kind of see the waves from above. It's just very it is what it is, isn't it? But the serpent here is red.
So again, my experience with this red serpent energy has been very closely linked with healing, but not necessarily just physical healing. As spiritual healing, mental healing. That it's been intrinsic in my understanding of healing myself as I've gone along.
Yeah.
And the connection with the water element and the sort of the realm of the water comes from this idea that, you know, the blood that runs in our veins is basically the water of life, if you want to put it that way. And this red serpent energy is one that's found very much within. It's one that's born of that fire inside.
Yeah.
And it can produce quite a profound healing aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And the symbol on the talisman we chose for this one obviously was the torch, which again, when you're thinking about water and fire don't mix, but it's not so much, again, it's depending on how you look at the use of the torch. We've seen in other cards in the deck how varied the usage of this, these torches are used, from, illumination, guidance, guarding, defense, offense. There's lots of different ways. So when you think about healing and fire, sometimes sometimes you have to have that sort of almost feverish burnout to sort of purge you of anything that's not healthy for you. And of all of the three, I find that the red serpent energy is the most personable. It's the one that hangs around.
Okay.
It's the one that you can usually call on the most often and the most sort of readily once you've made a connection with it. And it's just, I think for me, that one particularly has quite a lot of personal sort of connections, because it's one that I've worked with extensively for a number of years.
Okay. So what about number 60? I mean, this is the holy demon of the upper realm with the keyword of divinity. So we're obviously into the realm of air here.
Yeah.
And the symbol on the talisman here is also that is very specifically the astrological symbol for Hecate, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's, again, this one is probably the most elusive of the spirits. It's one that I've only ever really had very fleeting experience with, because it is so elevated and because it is so close to, Hecate's divinity. It's not one that you're going to get all the time. There's usually a very strong reasoning behind it, and it's usually something that's divinely guided. Usually in a similar way that, like, Hermes brings messages and such. This one is probably the one that's going to bring you like a direct message. It's gonna literally whisper it in your ear, kind of thing. And the idea to use the symbol of the astrological symbol for Hecate, which I think is Hecate in astrological terms, I think she's an asteroid. So again, it's quite, it's a heavenly body. It's something way out there that we probably can't even conceptualize or fathom in the grand scheme of things. And there has been occasion where, in my experience, to view these three spirits, and I've actually got tattoos that sort of half represent it, as we'll see with the card back, which is obviously based off a tattoo that I have on my chest that has the red serpent on it. I have a tattoo on my forearm of a black serpent coiled in such a way that it forms a key.
Ah, okay.
And I often see that key unlocks the sort of the Strophalos design on my chest, which then enables the white divine serpent to emerge. So it's probably the most ambiguous of the cards, because it's difficult to talk about it, because I've had so little direct sort of experience of it, other than the fact that I know it exists.
It's interesting for me. I mean, just to summarize, I mean, I kind of for me, these are three of the most awe-inspiring cards in the deck, but they were also three of the aspects that were the most difficult to come to terms with. So, I mean, do you literally see these as almost like spiritual embodiments of Hecate herself, or are they almost like familiars? Are they kind of guide you?
They have that sort of familial aspect. Then they are separate from Hecate, but they are hers. Or, they're under her remit as such. So I think we mentioned with one of the previous cards where we were talking about the idea of faith, and there are those times when the goddess is not going to be literally on your shoulder, where you can feel her, you can sense her, and things like that. There are times where she will distance herself from you, or there'll be times where you've ended up distanced from her because just life gets in the way. That's where these three spirits come in, that they are often there to help bridge that gap, which, especially if we have been feeling cut off or isolated for a period of time, rather than sort of trying and failing repeatedly to make contact with, the big H. Start smaller, use the serpent energy. They will take the messages back and forth, and it helps build or maintain a sense of a relationship, even at the times where you feel as though there isn't anything.
Yeah, they are very, as I say, for me, they are awe-inspiring, and I think a beautiful way to conclude the sequence of cards. That was just something that felt, even though I couldn't understand them when you first introduced me to them, it was just something that felt so right that they were there at the end of the sequence. And and we've finished our journey through the deck, which seems quite surreal, doesn't it?
Yes.
As we said, let's just talk about the back design, because that is almost the 61st card. There was a lot of effort went into this back design, wasn't there? And it was, I think, particularly as an artist for me, obviously I'd seen this particular tattoo on your chest, but I don't think I'd ever been asked to illustrate something that was so personal. This deck, I think, is probably more personal than any project I've ever illustrated. This really is an expression. It's almost like a picture book of your faith. And that was kind of, the further on we went, I thought, yeah, we're kind of putting your faith and your inner spiritual landscape into pictorial terms. And the more I thought about it, it just the card backs had to be equally personal. And then, it's something I discussed with you, wasn't it? I thought, well, what is more personal than the devotional tattoo and the representation of Hecate that you actually have in your skin? So what we did was we had I think it was a pre-existent photograph you had of it from when the tattoo was first done, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That you gave to me, and then using the vector graphic tools in Photoshop, I literally spent a whole day tracing round that image in the finest details so that we could split it into different components and layers, didn't we? And then that's what we've ended up with on the back of the card. So what you see on the back of every card is literally inscribed on Kenn's skin as basically a symbol of his faith in Hecate. So it's one of the most precious things about the deck to me. Why don't you talk us through it? Because after all, this is literally part of you.
It is, and I guess it probably speaks a lot of my sort of reluctance to almost. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, the fact that we've sat here for 11, 12 videos talking about the deck and putting it out there, but I still have a huge sense of occasional imposter syndrome, and not really knowing or feeling comfortable in putting myself out there. So even when you suggested to include this as the back design, I was still fairly reluctant, even if I didn't sort of voice it, because yes, at the time when we first sort of completed the deck and we did our prototypes, it made sense to have something like that on the back, because I was the only one that was well, me and you were the only ones that were using it.
Yeah.
But then when it came to sort of gearing up for publication, I worried about the inclusion of this as a back
Mm.
design, just because it is so personal
Yeah.
that it might alienate people because they might not necessarily be able to relate to it.
Yeah, I never
Um,
saw it like that, because to me, this design is so universal as I understand it now, because
mm,
there are so many universal elements of who she is, and why a devotee would follow her, in
yeah.
here.
And I
Yeah.
mean, I suppose in a way I should learn that, the fact that Los Scarabeo used that same design for the
I
box.
should be on the box.
So I was like, okay. But yeah, I mean that, as far as a devotional tattoo goes,
Mm,
it was something that I had. I mean, I've got several devotional tattoos,
mm,
but this was one that I kind of really wanted to encapsulate. And the artist that I got to draw it up for me, Tyler Wainwright,
mm.
formerly of Queen of Hearts Tattoo in Coventry. She's since moved to a different tattoo shop, and I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, she's been really good with my tattoos. She's always liked what I bring as a concept of and an idea, and then I kind of just let her sort of draw it and tweak it so that it works as a tattoo.
Mm.
Um, I will say that chest tattoos, they really hurt. But, I've got two one
Yeah.
on each side, and they're both fairly small and both fairly simple, but
Mm.
they both hurt. but
No swearing. I'll have to edit that out.
oh, sorry. But yeah, they both hurt.
Yeah.
And but then I use that. That's quite transformative. I kind of use that sort of pain experience as a transformative element,
Mm,
whilst I'm you know basically making an indelible mark on my body, in offering to the goddess.
mm,
And yeah, so obviously, as you can see in this design, we have this red serpent creating this, the Hekatean wheel symbol around the phases of the moon, and then
mm.
the Voces Magicae, the Ephesian letters
Yeah.
that that feature on one of the other cards
Mm.
around the outside in this cyclical, um, almost like a wheel in
Yeah.
in in and of itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just it's taken me a lot of time to accept this as the back of the card,
Mm.
just because you know I just want to. I mean, I was quite happy for us to have something like the actual Strophilus card or the
Yeah.
Hector wheel card that we designed, just to have
Mm.
that as the back design, because I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that'll be fine. It's fairly simple and straightforward. But yeah, it's taken me a while, and I hope
Mm.
that other people like it and that they can relate to it, and see
Yeah.
the mystery of the image. Despite the fact that it's on me, that it's relatable and accessible to other people as well.
I think what struck me was, I mean, yeah, the Hecate's wheel was very obvious for the back of the card, but I thought, well, I can't put that on having already used it on a card. Whereas the components of that wheel made a great deal of sense. Whereas actually paying homage to your tattoo, it allowed us to do that, but in a way that this is an image that's completely unique to the back of the card. And
Mm,
also, what it does is it brings it back for me that this, as a deck, is a deeply personal act of devotion. Creating this deck for you was a deeply personal act of devotion. That's something that I was kind of privileged to come along with the journey as the illustrator to bring that act of devotion to life. But ultimately, it's your act. And I think by having the design on the backs of the cards that we have, what I hope it will do is that it will denote it as deck as an act of devotion to be used in divination
mm,
for anyone else who buys it or chooses to follow the goddess through it.
yeah.
I think it's it's easy to be able to look at this back design, and whilst paying homage to the fact that, you know, as a piece of artwork, it's deeply personal to you, that also, it doesn't have to be exclusive to you, and other people can kind of recognize and celebrate that personal element. But at the same time, it acts as a pointer that the deck can be as personal for them. And if it succeeds in doing that, it's done everything that I would want it to. And certainly, I mean, the humor of the publishers picking that image for the box was not lost on either of us, was it? I think the irony is we got to the stage where I think it's what we would have put on the front of the box. And this is the only instance. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very, very lucky with all of my publications. I mean, the 3 publishers I've worked with have all done a fantastic job with every single deck that I've had published. But normally the process is that, you know, they will ask you to recommend a selection of images. You know, I mean, in most instances with my, you know, my editor at Lo Scarabeo, I mean, you know, they kind of normally just say, well, you know, have you got any suggestions for the box? You know, at which point, because ultimately the decision has to be theirs, because, you know, they know their market, and, you know, they usually know best as, you know, what to put on the front of a package that will actually help it to sell the best, and that their salespeople can sell it with. So normally, I mean, the procedure with all of the publishers I've worked with is you just send them a selection of images of the ones that you think would work. Most of the time, they will go with one of those. Sometimes they will go their own way. But where I've been lucky is that in every single instance, I've been really happy with all the box packaging designs that have been done. And I mean, in the instance of the Healing Light Tarot, the design team went their own way and picked images I wouldn't have thought of. But actually, I was way happier with the box than, you know, had it been, these are images I wouldn't have thought of featuring, and it really worked. So this one was quite odd in that, one, you know, they went with the image that, had we been doing it ourselves, we would have gone with. But, you know, it's just ironic, isn't it? It's the one image that was the most uncomfortable initially, and yet it's the one that's come to, you know, to really symbolize the deck more than any other. So yeah, when you get the deck, hopefully now you will understand how deeply personal, you know, it is from the front cover onwards, you know, and then through every page. So that's kind of brought us to the end of our journey through the cards, hasn't it? It's, you know, I've loved this project. I really have. I you know, I love the fact that, you know, you kind of get to revisit it again when you know, when you're publicizing it, and it's almost, I don't want to kind of step out of this world. In the next video, we're just, you know, which is the final one in this series, we're going to be talking about ways to work with the deck, aren't we? In the meantime, from both of us, I really hope that you've enjoyed sharing our insights, and particularly Kenn's insights into these cards. You know, I hope that actually when you're working with the deck, that you'll return to these videos, and that our aim with these was that they will act to complement and enhance the book that comes with the deck. So, you know, if you're working with the book and also referring to these videos, then you're getting the best of the deck that we can give, hopefully. Yeah, we really hope you've enjoyed this journey. Do join us one last time as we discuss, you know, some practical ways to work with the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. And yeah, thanks for bearing with us this far, and fingers crossed, we'll see you next time.